Hello everyone, how's it going? It's good to be back. I've taken a little bit of a break from recording and wrapped up all the additional sort of contracty work I had on the side, which is nice. So I can sort of come back to this and make this my primary focus. Yeah, so you might notice that this is a little bit different. I've been tinkering with how exactly we're going to set this guy up. Which reminds me I should probably open up my reference images. Yeah, so let me just open that real quick. So I wanted to experiment with this a little bit, just because this is kind of a main, like, focal point. This is something that, it's one of the first things you see when you look at it. It's in the center. It's pretty intricate. It takes up a lot of space. So I wanted to get it right. So I was experimenting with this. And as you can see, I've just sort of done one side and mirrored it over, which is the technique we're going to do. I'll be rebuilding this with you guys and doing it a little bit better. But I will say, this part might have a bit more editing than normal, because even though I've been experimenting with it, I haven't really got it perfect, which means during this recording, I'm going to be tinkering along with it, and I'll try and edit out any unnecessary, I guess, sort of recorded clips. The issue with this, guys, as you can see, it sort of fans out in a way where, like, these parts stay straight. It's just the tips fan out, and I couldn't really think of a good way yet to sort of do that. What I did was I grabbed these end pieces and scaled them out, and obviously it's not perfect because I want everything to sort of rotate correctly, which it's not doing here. So I'll have to think of a good way to do something like that as we go. But let me explain everything. So I'm just going to essentially Control Shift I. Yeah, that's what it is. I just kind of want to select everything but those two guys. So let's just deselect these guys, isolate. So what I've done is I have just sort of made one of these pieces. If we look at our reference, we have plenty of references as to what this looks like. It's a very thin piece, becomes a little bit thicker as it comes up. I'm going to adjust this shape here. But yeah, thin, becomes thicker. This top part, based on this reference, seems to be just a little bit taller than I currently have it. Maybe I'd even extrude that part up. And then let's flatten all this out for simplicity. And simplify this wherever we are. So this, of course, is going to be the easiest way to go about something like this. Essentially, yeah, just sort of make one, and then we'll use the one as much as we can and duplicate it around. Now, the reason this guy is kind of tricky is because it doesn't fan out in a perfect circle. There are some things that are a little bit tricky about that. We can't just use an array tool. Before I get too deep into that, I'm just going to sort of bring it down and have it pinch in a little bit, like it seems to be doing here. So I'm just going to extrude that down a little bit and scale it in like so. Kind of seems to be positioned that way. But once we get this set up, I'll bring everything over and sort of do a better job explaining what I'm talking about here. Just going to merge these vertices down. But yeah, let's start just by making one of these guys. And if you're wondering how exactly I made it, you should be able to put this together relatively simply. I'm going to unhide everything because it's making it lag. Essentially, I just started with a box. I extruded it down. I followed the shape in the reference. And I just made sure it fit into this crevice here. Plenty of different references, different angles. Like this was probably the best shot that sort of showed how deep the sort of swoop went. So I just sort of recommend looking around and finding something that works. So now that we have this new piece, I can replace this old one and just vertex snap it to the middle here. So yeah, just making sure it lines up there. I do not have anything on the other side. You might be wondering why that is. And honestly, it's because me center pivot on this guy. Honestly, it's because I kind of want to do this in multiple pieces. So if we look at the reference for this guy, let me find a better reference. Yeah, so it's like these hooks come down and around and then come under here. I think it would be an absolute nightmare to extrude and then bring around and then extrude down and come back around over here and plug it into a piece. So I want to have these pieces all done at once. Then we'll do all the connecting pieces done in the next part, or whatever part where we get around to doing that. And then we can attach them, or maybe we won't even attach them. We'll just have them like all plug in here. We'll see. It would probably make the most sense to attach them if we're already having them wrap around and come up here. We'll just see how that goes. But right now, if we get this set up properly, everything else will line up relatively easily. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these except for the end one. And then on the other side, I'm just going to delete this. Now, as I was saying before, normally with something sort of circular, what you could do is move the pivot to, like, say, the middle of the circle, and then just Control D and rotate it and rotate, 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 rotate. The problem is that this isn't a perfect semicircle, so if I just rotate it like this, as you can see, it's not really lined up properly. So I then have to go through and like realign it like this. And then even with that done, these tips are fanning out in a different direction all the way around. So with this, honestly, I just opted to do a very manual sort of placement. Let me just isolate this guy. So I'm going to center pivot. I'm going to move the pivot and snap it to the very end, and then back to the top. So it is in the middle, but at the end here, actually, I might even just poke face, put it here, snap it to the end, just because I want the pivot, because we're rotating based on this point. This point is what's like closest to this entrance piece, and the entrance piece is really what determines the location of everything. So what I did when I was sort of setting this up was I went into my multi-view, and as kind of lame as it is, I really did just go for a manual, like Control D, move this guy a little bit, rotate it into position, just making sure it fits within these sort of like confines. And then if we go back to this view, we'll be like, oh yeah, there it is. It fits, it's slightly rotated. And I did that all the way up. There's probably a way where I could say make a curve that perfectly lines up here, and then you can have things duplicate along the curve, following sort of like an animation path. Realistically, the time it would take to sort of figure that out and explain it would be far longer than just duplicating this and then mirroring it over. So I'm just going to continue duplicating and rotating, which I know isn't as exciting, but it's going to get the job done. So I'm going to just continue Control D and rotating. On the bright side, we only really have to do this for half of it because we can just sort of mirror over the other half. That being said, it's still a pretty tedious and boring technique. I'm sure somebody watching or somebody online might have a way to automate this. But like I said, just because it's not really a traditional, like proper ellipse or rounded shape, there's really no way to just use an array tool or any of those default modifiers, at least in a very simple way, or at least a way that I'm aware of, to get that done. So let me just continue to rotate this. Yeah, not a lot to really comment on for this, but it does feel good to be recording again. Like I said, I took a decent break. It might have been maybe 2 weeks or so, which means I've been recording this tutorial for ages now. But it's nice. I keep thinking about how great it's going to be to finally post something like this, and we are very, very, very close to taking this into Zbrush, which is always a ton of fun. That entire part of the process is going to be like an absolute joy to do. And I have a long weekend right now, and then another long weekend next weekend. I'm just going to be taking some time off. So during that time, I'm really hoping to get all of this done for you guys. Yeah, as you can see, some of these parts don't fit in perfectly, but we can fix that in Zbrush. It really is not the biggest deal. Yeah, it seems like all of these guys are a slightly different size, and as we approach the ends, they're becoming thinner. If we go back to this view, they're getting a little bit tighter, but that's okay. As long as they're not actually overlapping. And even so, one thing I failed to note at the very beginning is that, well, you've probably already noticed it, but these guys are pretty janky in most of these things. So we have the freedom to kind of mess them up and have them slightly overlapping as long as we adjust the actual position of it. So we'll be doing that. So we really don't have too much to worry about. The biggest issue for us right now is going to be figuring out how to properly fan out the tips. So we're approaching the end here. Just two more after this one. Okay. Yeah, these ones are definitely a lot thicker, so we'll have to scale these guys down. And then, right, we have this one. So they do fit in there pretty nicely, minus a couple scaling issues here, which we should fix right now before we mirror anything over, right? So I'm just going to make sure my scale tool is on object. It's going to sort of know how we've rotated it and just scale this in. This is a little bit of a cheat because these should, in theory, be all the same, but this is like adjusting everything by like less than a millimeter, so I can't really imagine anyone's going to notice such a minute change. So the only thing to keep in mind with something like this is make sure you're also selecting the back vertices. Okay. Seems like the scale's off on more than I expected, but I guess it's kind of good in a sense, because then they're all a bit more uniform. And then these guys all seem to be more or less fine. Okay, so the only thing we really have to figure out here that's a bit tricky is how we're going to have them fan out. And just to reiterate, it's like they start off straight and then they're rotating, rotating, rotating. But this rotation is a lot more extreme than, say, like this rotation. So I've tried in my personal time experimenting with soft selection. I've tried experimenting with, yeah, like putting a pivot in the middle and scaling it all out. It is a tricky one. If we change our rotation to component, we can rotate based on this. So maybe that might be the best way to do it. I just want to see how that would look with two of them and see if it's really ideal. I think it could be possible. I think that might be one way to do it, and then we'd have to sort of unalign everything. But we have to keep in mind that we are trying to make the rotation a little bit less every single time. So just by guessing. Like it should have a V shape in between, right? Since the rotation is decreasing. If it was like perfectly flush, it would be like that, but we want it to be pointing it a little bit, so it would have a bit of a V shape there. These ones near the top seem to be a lot more cramped than the ones near the bottom. And I definitely didn't do the rotation as extreme as it should be. So like I said, I'll be experimenting a little bit, but I will also cut out the parts that aren't totally necessary. What I am going to do right now, though, is try something where I select all of these. Shift right click vertex. I'm just going to select all the end pieces. And I kind of want to scale these all down. They scale from a middle point, so I'm going to go to move, change this to normal, and see if I can scale in the normal a little bit. I think that's a little bit better. I just don't want them to be as tightly packed in there. Something like that, and I'm looking at my reference and it's looking all right to be of that size, I'd say. Could even probably bring it down a bit more. Probably should have brought this guy down with it. So let's just select this. Match it. Okay. Let's go back to world. And yeah, let's see how extreme we can rotate this. Well, let's first start off by seeing how crazy of a rotation it should be. Like that's a pretty intense angle. Like it's almost as if it's riding up all the way. So if I take this and I rotate it like so, the component mode isn't really helping too much unless I do something like that. Yeah, maybe I'll just try going through like this and seeing how this turns out. And just moving it like so. The beautiful part about this is we only have to do half of it. But the most important thing is that we have our axis orientation for both rotation and movement set to component. Yeah, that way everything is sort of based on the rotation. As long as nobody frees their transformations, we should be good. So we'll keep these guys pretty extreme for now. I'm definitely underestimating like how many there are. But they do have to be slowly transitioning back to normal. I am quite a fan at this point that there's built-in imperfection, like they're all kind of wobbly in most of the reference images. It's pretty easy to match that when I'm doing a technique that's so sort of like ham-fisted like this. It means it really does not have to be perfect. In fact, it should not be perfect unless you're going for a brand new typewriter, which we're not. We're going for something a bit older, a bit more rustic and worn down. Which should work out for us. Let's see, we're about halfway, so we can start to really, you know, not have it fan out so much. We still want to capture that V shape so it's rotating out, but nothing too intense. And maybe this is going to go better than I expected, actually. Famous last words, I know. Knock on wood, but it seems to be a good attempt. I have done this quite a few times though, like in my spare time, just trying to get the ideal look. It has been kind of finicky overall. But It seems like we're getting somewhere with this. Kind of want this rotation to be a bit more. It's fading off a little bit too soon for my liking. Some of the gizmos are a little bit weird on this one, but yeah, overall the fanning seems to be good. It is raising up, so I'm going to have to manually adjust that a little bit. Let's continue just rotating. I'm going to change the move to world at this point. Just moving it along. Maybe even change the rotation to world as well. We're almost at a point where we're plateauing off. So very, very subtle rotations now. Almost completely straight here. Just a little rotation. And then same with this one. I'll pull it out just a little bit and have the slightest turn. And then since we pulled all them out, I should probably pull that one out. So let's see. The fanning is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. We do just sort of have to adjust the positioning of it. And by that I kind of mean like how far away from the sort of holder it is. So I'm just going to grab these guys and bring them in a little bit. Yeah, they really seem to raise up quite a bit, I guess, as I was moving them around. I didn't really notice, but that's okay. It's nice that the vertexes are already selected for me when I go into vertex mode on them. And that's kind of the fanned out look I'm going for. Not as straight as I'd like, so let's go ahead and kind of select all these guys, select this, isolate it, and work on evening this out a little bit. Going for a mostly straight line, not perfect, but better than what we have here. Yeah, the rotation isn't perfect. But in a sense, that's pretty okay. Just gonna sort of massage it out a little bit. I think it goes a little too soft too quickly. Like, it should stay more rotated for longer. So it goes like these are all pretty straight. If you weren't really paying attention, you might even just think that they were. So I want it to be a bit more obvious. It's a little bit better. These guys have a lot more room than these guys do. I don't know how I feel about that. I suppose I could use soft select. So I'm just holding or pressing B and then holding B and middle mouse to get this sort of selection. And I can, I kind of want to bring most of it over. So I can then just have the spacing be a bit more consistent. And I think we'll reach a point where it's mostly consistent. Let me just do that. So I think that's pretty good. I like there's some wobbles in there. It's mostly consistent, but not perfect. This guy for some reason seems to be a little short. Yeah, let's go ahead and mirror that over. So I'm going to select all of them but the middle one. Do a mesh combine. Move our pivot to, say, the center of this guy. Freeze transforms, delete history, and mirror that X. And that's a pretty good looking sort of like fanning out. Maybe I do want to bring this guy back a little bit. He seemed to stand out. He probably stands out because he's like the only perfectly straight one. But yeah, I'm liking how that looks. So let's go ahead and save this real quick. Okay, and I think what we should do is add in our imperfections. We have this hidden layer, which only really has this. I think we can get rid of this. What I want to do is, using a layer, sort of duplicate this, put it somewhere else. Let's just mesh combine it for convenience sake. But let's add it to the hidden layer so we can sort of toggle this on and off. And the reason I want to do that is, say we start, you know, grabbing some vertices on this guy and we, you know, move it up and we rotate it and we start to break it out a little bit. It's going to be very hard to get that back to normal. So this is just going to be acting as a backup just in case something goes wrong. But yeah, let's go ahead and look at our reference images and kind of see how wonky the traditional ones are. Like this one, for example, is pretty straight. I like how that turned out. Some of them are a bit more kind of janked up. But either way, none of them are perfect. I kind of like this look here, where they're just a little bit out of place. Some are raised up a little bit more than others. But it's also making it clear that they should be a bit more tightly packed. So what I'm going to do first of all is mesh combine all of these. And let's see if we can make them a little bit tighter. Once again, going to the move tool, changing this to normal. We can scale these all up to be a little bit tighter. It's looking a bit more like the reference images where they're all sort of jammed in there. They're all resting in there very nicely. It's a good look. I can bring this back to world. To be honest, they're already kind of janky, so we're not going to really have to do too much. I just want to break up some of the symmetry because you can see that like these two, for example, are the exact same. So I could double click this. It's going to select the whole island, but I could just isolate it to this one and say rotate it a little bit and have it like slightly damaged. And then this one, I could do the opposite. I could rest it back in there. So we're sort of seeing this sort of bump here. Kind of like an odd one sticking out. Adds a little bit of realism that it's, you know, an actual used piece. Something like that. We're gonna need one on this side now. This one's already naturally kind of poking through. So I'm just selecting it by double clicking and deselecting what I don't want. And also make it look intentional. Like, don't make it look like you're just kind of modeling and messing up. Like something like this doesn't look like an error that happened on accident. It's kind of an intentional look, even from a distance. Okay, that one's sort of weird. And I think maybe one of the top ones could be beaten up a little bit. Interesting. This one's sticking through. Oh, it's because I grabbed a face I shouldn't have. That's why. I was going to say, are all of them kind of sticking through? I guess not. Which is definitely a great thing. Didn't want to have to go back and sort that all out. So that one definitely looks like it's kind of jammed into the wrong position. Maybe a bit too much. Something a bit more like that. I don't want it to be like totally busted, so maybe one more. Maybe one near the middle, because that's probably where people's eyes are going to be drawn to the most when looking at this kind of stuff. And just have this one sort of going against the grain. See how that looks. Let's turn off wireframe. Maybe it's a bit too much. Why is the gizmo? Oh, probably because I have that selected. Okay. Something like that is pretty good. Kind of stands out a bit. Maybe this one should be normal. Yeah, I think we've janked up enough of them. Are these two the same? Maybe I should pick a different one that doesn't look so symmetrical. See what I mean by it's kind of difficult to get them back into position? If we did this for a bunch and we're just like, nah, screw it, we'll keep them straight. It'd be kind of a nightmare. Yeah, I think sort of minimal jank actually. Like I'm liking that. Like there's some intentional stuff, like you can tell it's really messed up. And I think that sort of makes the rest of it being imperfect kind of more believable. Yeah, I kind of like that. I just want to make sure none of them are really seeping in. I guess we could grab all of these guys and just raise them a little bit. Should do it. Yeah, so that's that part. One thing I do want to mention that we should probably take care of right about now is that, yeah, this front plate isn't as low as I have it here. So that could probably be something quick we could take care of. If I could find a clear reference, and then we'll call it apart because I want to do more research on how we're going to connect everything to the keys. I think that's a whole beast in itself. That's probably going to be a bit more challenging actually, now that I think about it, because we have to have this little point somehow connect with every single one of these keys. But with that done, like that's all the keys. So that's kind of the biggest hurdle out of the way. Yeah, like it's cut off here, but it's not very clear as to how it's being cut off. This is a pretty good reference. So it's not so much that it's actually cut off, it's that it's more like there's slits in it. Interesting. I could just include that in the next part. I don't think I've done enough proper research to really know exactly how I'm gonna go about that. So I think I'll call it here. Definitely a shorter part, but I'm glad we got this part done. Yeah, I know I got some of it done off camera, but we went through the whole thing together either way. So thank you guys for watching this part. I'm going to do some research, get this part done, and we'll be diving right back into it with the sort of cutoff here and how we're going to connect them all together. All right, thank you guys for watching, and yeah, I'll catch you in the next part.